And let's move on to Ann Dubay, who's going to talk to us about sustainability in the Sonoma Valley Basin.
Thanks, Tim. So in the prior presentation, we learned that the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency is complying with SGMA by creating a groundwater sustainability plan. Tim, if you want to forward to the next slide. That details the issues and concerns with local groundwater. So the plan will include a roadmap for how these concerns will be addressed to ensure that there's enough water for people and the environment today and 50 years into the future. So in this presentation, what we're going to talk about is the heart of that plan, which is sustainable management criteria. So the presentation is going to cover the following topics: predicting future groundwater conditions, defining sustainability, understanding sustainability indicators, key terms related to sustainable groundwater management, and next steps. So one of the key components of the groundwater sustainability plan is to predict what challenges the basin will likely encounter in the future. And as Marcus mentioned in his presentation, we'll be using a model to take into account projected future water use, climate change, and other factors. So the kinds of questions that the modelers are exploring include: how much will the population change, and will that growth occur in cities or in the country? Will agriculture look the same, or will it change? How will changing a climate affect rainfall, droughts, and water use? So all of these factors and many more could impact groundwater availability and quality. We'll be holding a workshop this fall or winter to describe those modeling results. The information based on the model will be used in the groundwater sustainability plan to determine how the basin will reach and maintain long-term sustainability. Because no plan can be perfect and every basin has data gaps, the state anticipates that the plans will continue to be refined and modified as new data is collected. So in other words, the plans are working documents that will be adapted and modified as we continue to learn and collect data. Now, sustainability, that word cloud in the prior slide, showed a lot of different meanings for the word sustainability, and it can be broadly interpreted. So the drafters of SGMA defined groundwater sustainability very carefully, and it's the avoidance of locally defined, significant, and unreasonable conditions for these 6 undesirable results: the chronic lowering of groundwater levels, land subsidence caused by groundwater conditions, seawater intrusion due to groundwater conditions, degradation of water quality caused by groundwater conditions, reduction of groundwater storage, and depletion of interconnected surface water like Sonoma Creek and other creeks caused by groundwater conditions. So throughout 2020, the focus of staff, the advisory committee, and the board are defining sustainable management criteria, or what sustainability means specifically and in measurable terms for those 6 undesirable results of the Sonoma Valley. The drafters of SGMA provided very specific terminology for how sustainability needs to be defined. For each of those sustainability indicators, the sustainable management criteria must include a sustainability goal, define significant and unreasonable effects, identify representative monitoring sites, develop measurable objectives, define minimum thresholds, determine undesirable results, and develop interim milestones. So we're going to spend a few minutes going into more detail on a few key terms, but a cheat sheet of this terminology is available at the website and can be really helpful because the SGMA terminology is not how I think most people think normally. So SGMA requires that a significant and unreasonable effects be described for each sustainability indicator. So this is a qualitative statement that our gut tells us we don't want to have happen. For example, for groundwater levels, significant and unreasonable could be that it would be significant and unreasonable if rural residents, farmers, municipal water users, businesses, the environment, and other beneficial users are impacted by declining groundwater levels. Another term is called representative monitoring points. And representative monitoring points reliably provide high-quality data that characterize representative groundwater conditions in the basin. The monitoring points are used to determine if the basin is meeting its sustainability objectives. And they're a subset of all the monitoring wells in the basin. As Marcus mentioned, we have a really great, robust monitoring network in Sonoma Valley. And so not all of those monitoring wells would be a representative monitoring point, but only those wells that meet certain requirements by the state and that are representative of what's happening in that area. Another term is called measurable objectives. And measurable objectives are specific quantifiable goals that at each representative monitoring site to maintain or improve groundwater conditions in order to achieve the aspirational sustainability goal for the basin. Measurable objectives reflect the GSA's desired groundwater conditions and guide the GSA to achieve its sustainability goal within 20 years. And while measurable objectives define quantitatively where we would like to be, minimum thresholds are the numerical lines in the sand that we don't want to cross. For each sustainability indicator, the minimum thresholds are the quantitative, measurable values that reflect what is significant and unreasonable at every measuring site. So as an example, in Sonoma Valley, the GSA is considering a draft minimum thresholds that are intended to ensure that future groundwater levels do not dry up people's wells. Undesirable results are the worst case scenario. Those are quantitative combinations of the minimum thresholds that apply to individual wells, those regional or those representative monitoring points that define sustainability for each sustainability indicator. So basically, if you think about it, undesirable results are the roll-up of the minimum thresholds, and they apply over the entire basin. The Groundwater Sustainability Plan will list which and how groundwater users will be affected if undesirable results occur, and the GSA must also define a pathway for achieving sustainability. So we can put it all together. There's in this slide, this next slide, from the North Fork Kings GSA, which is a critically overdrafted basin in the Central Valley, who is on a shorter timeline than we are. But I liked this graphic that they used on water quality as their sustainability indicator. So it shows at the bottom left the minimum threshold for water quality, and you can see the water looks all gunky. There's all these little capsules and things in it. And notes that when the minimum threshold is exceeded, it may cause significant and unreasonable degraded water quality that's considered an undesirable result. And on the right-hand side of the slide at the bottom, we can see the much cleaner water there, and that's achieved by meeting the measurable objective. In our basin, measurable objectives must be attained by 2042. We're on a little bit slower timeline than the critically overdrafted basins. So on the next slide, just want to get back to this graphic. The Sonoma Valley Basin is, as Marcus described, is in okay shape. We have some groundwater level issues in a few areas, and we have some local water quality concerns. But compared to other basins in the state that are critically overdrafted, we're in okay shape. The modeling that's underway will help us determine how the basin could look in 50 years. And if modeling indicates that there could be new problems or that existing problems will become worse and that undesirable results might occur, SGMA requires the Groundwater Sustainability Plan to identify potential projects and management actions. And these projects and management actions can be as simple as developing, next slide, please. They can be as simple as developing water conservation programs, or they can be as complex as developing projects that would recharge the basin with surface water, or that would expand the use of recycled water to farmers and others who currently use groundwater for irrigation. The GSA is committed to aggressively seeking grant funding to help pay for the cost of implementing the plan. However, because groundwater users will ultimately benefit from a healthier basin, they'll also likely pay some fees to help cover the costs, which will include putting in new monitoring wells, monitoring itself, and reporting and management of the GSA as required by SGMA. The GSA won't start working on the implementation budget until 2021, but the work that's happening in 2020 is a key building block to future actions. So it's important that groundwater users and people who care about the health of the aquifer share their thoughts now about what sustainability means to you. So currently we're finishing work on sustainable management criteria for seawater intrusion, land subsidence, and groundwater levels. And then we'll start tackling water quality, groundwater storage, and interconnected surface water. And because developing these sustainable management criteria is an iterative process, and all the management criteria will be revisited and, if necessary, revised after the GSA has determined which projects and management actions might be needed to achieve or maintain sustainability. And the GSA plans to hold another community workshop later this year or early next year to discuss the modeling results and the draft sustainable management criteria. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about sustainable management criteria.
And I don't see any hand raised yet. I'm looking at the chat and don't see chat popping up yet. So did run just a little bit over on that, so we might want to move on to the breakout groups, and we can accept any questions and answer you remotely. I'm happy to follow up with you all. What do you think, Ann?
I think that sounds good.
Okay, for the breakout groups, you're going to receive a notice asking you to leave the meeting and go to a breakout group, and we're going to break you up into small groups. There'll be, I guess, 3 or 4 groups. You'll have a facilitator who will go over these questions with you. And so it looks like we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes or so to go over the questions, and then we'll regroup.
Well, thanks all for joining us back. I'm not sure if all the breakout rooms are here yet, and I'll let Tim take over on the facilitation.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for that. Let me see if I can get the questions back up. Let's see, Microsoft PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so the questions are back up. So what we wanted to do was have a quick debrief from each facilitator on what they learned from their folks. And maybe I'll just start to try to set an example in terms of how much level of detail and kind of what the time level is, considering we are running a little late at this point. So we had several people in our group that did have wells, and one person indicated they had their water level declining about 1 foot per year. They had to drill a new well due to a collapse, and now they have a multi-tank system, which they think has taken care of that. There is concern by some well owners about being in a community now surrounded by large tracts of vineyards that seem to be expanding and drilling more wells. Groundwater levels seem to be one of the most prevalent concerns in the depletion of the bank account, and surface water groundwater interaction would be taken care of if groundwater levels were stabilized and even increased. And there was a need they mentioned a need to monitor and maybe put guardrails around extractions. And some of their concerns were, stop putting in more wells to address groundwater levels, feel that some pumpers may fight pumping reductions and maybe need metering. and concern about those who use water for business profit versus health and safety needs. And finally, land use decisions in well permitting process are important and should be part of the consideration. And there's a general plan process coming up. So that was what I had. So I guess I'll turn it over to you now, Ann.
Well, I actually did not facilitate a group. Ken Johnson and Andrea and Fred were the other facilitators.
Okay, well, let's go to Andrea.
Thank you very much. I want to say we had a wonderful dialogue representing the vineyard industry and our master gardener. So we're definitely looking at how we can monitor saline intrusion, as well as some recycled or rainwater capture options for those on wells to help with irrigation. So appreciate their feedback and their participation today. Ken or Fred?
We had a number of people who had wells. 3 people had wells, 2 of them in the West Valley, 1 in the Upper West Valley. And those were both deep wells that had issues with water quality related to volcanics and thermal waters, it sounded like. And one of the persons had to drill a much deeper well as a result of well competition with people, and said that there was quite a bit of heat and controversy there on his part of the valley about groundwater, but he's excited that we're in this process. And we had one person in the South Valley who didn't find out how deep the wells were, but they used recycled water and had some issues with saline issues, most likely of some type of brackish water intrusion. So people had concerns about water quality, about the overall sustainability of groundwater in the basin. People were aware that there was declining groundwater levels. And so I think that we had a good group, and we learned some things about the basin wells from some of the stakeholders who told us their screening depths and the depths of their wells and where they are. And Marcus took notes, so that was perfect.
Great. Thank you. Good job, Fred. And Ken. Let's see. He is, let me unmute Ken.
Oops. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Gotcha. Thank
Great.
you, Ken.
Thank you. Had a great discussion. 3 people are well owners, including myself. The other 2 well owners were actually from
I think we lost you, Ken. I can't hear you, Ken. I don't know if you can hear me.
Was anybody else from Ken's group? If you can unmute yourself, if you're from Ken's group and might be able to give a little synopsis, that'd be great.
Norman or Sue, why don't you give that synopsis?
There you go. Do we need to unmute you? Are you there, Norman?
I'm here, yeah. Though I didn't take any notes, so I've got, I may not do much of a job, but we had people, we had a representative in the Haylands south of 121, and local residential owner here just south of 121. So we did have some representation of that area that is subject to potential saline intrusion. We talked a bit about that and about the potential
10 minutes
for injection of I'm losing my words here. Injection of water to increase groundwater levels. That wasn't that was regarded as a somewhat dangerous process, but if it were done in a natural way, might be something we should pursue. Anyone else that was in this that could help me? I'm forgetting the detail here.
Sue Smith did say that she had declining groundwater. It actually was artesian at one point where she lives at Circle Bar, and she had to drill deeper wells.
Hey, this is Ken. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Ken.
Thank you. I think Tim and I were probably muting and unmuting at the same time, so I apologize for that. So in addition to what Norman said, I think the interesting thing was that there is definitely a sensitivity to water level monitoring in our group in general, or decline of water levels. Water quality concerns are also quite clear among them. One of our participants has multiple wells and has noted, with a history at this site over, I don't know, last 3 or 4 decades at least, family farm, and they have noticed significant changes in the groundwater quality during that time, and have noticed a change in the taste of the water over that time. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. Clearly, the issues which were of main concern were declining in water levels, general water quality, as well as seawater intrusion. Coming from Shelbyville, that wasn't such a big surprise, or that part of the basin. As far as what priorities are for our discussion, really the water levels were very, very key. Recharge and conservation were themes that were amplified throughout all people. Kind of aggressively addressing the water levels issue throughout the basin was also talked about in the sense that it's not quite good enough to just stabilize where we're at, but where there are some places that would probably benefit from recovering water levels. And in that discussion, actually, injection of recycled water was not favored in our group, just because of the concerns about water quality impacts from recycled water, but there's a lot more to talk about there, I think. And then sort of more of a long range discussion about bigger projects like the Highway 37 reconstruction or re-engineering, and the San Pablo Bay restoration activities, and the fact that maybe groundwater was not explicitly considered in those projects, groundwater quality in particular, but those are important elements as well. And I don't know if Marcus is still on the line, but one of our participants said that there's a fish and game camp too that has some wells, and that those ought to be included in our monitoring program. I don't know if we know about those or not. So that was my update. So sorry about the mute problems.
That's what I would have said if I'd been taking notes. Thank you. That was very good.
Thank you very much, Ken. Excellent. So with that, I'm going to now turn to Ann and ask if she has any final thoughts on this community meeting.
Hey, Tim, could I add one more thing here from my group?
Sure, Fred.
A couple of people mentioned about the competing priorities of flood mitigation versus capturing runoff, and how in the past urban areas had really tried to control flooding, and that had made water runoff too fast, and so that impacts people in the South Valley worse. And so there ought to be some way that people are in our group said that we can figure out a way to capture it, slow it, and spread it like the RCD suggested back in the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Management Program days.
Okay, thank you, Fred. So now back to you, Ann. Any final thoughts for this community meeting?
No, I don't have any, but I don't know if Chair Gorin might want to say anything.
Yep, that was my next piece, was to ask Chair Gorin if she has any closing comments she would like to make.
I just wanted to thank everyone for participating in this workshop. This basin, Sonoma Valley Basin, is more challenged than the other two basins, and it will be all hands on deck to ensure that we achieve sustainability in Sonoma Valley for the years to come. So thanks all, especially those who've lived in the valley for a number of years. We need your history, and it's really important that you participated. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Chair Gorn, and thank you to all of the participants in the meeting. It was a very nice group of people to talk with, and with that, and thank you for being patient and allowing us to run a little over. With that, I guess we should sign off and say a good night to all.
Thank you.